Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Back when the Grand Heaven Master had appointed Bai Xiaochun as the inspections commissioner, many people in Arch-Emperor City had turned their attention to the inspections manor in Burrow 4. Therefore, a lot of people noticed when he led the 1,000 black-armored men out into the open, and they trembled with fear. All of them suddenly recalled what was now something of a legend. In the past, this army had caused blood and gore to rain down on Arch-Emperor City, and had come to be known as the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion. In the past, they caused blood to rain down for 7 months straight, the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion. Countless eyes were focused on Bai Xiaochun and the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion soldiers that followed him. The nobility and aristocracy were shaken, not because of any fear of Bai Xiaochun himself, but fear of the army of corpse troopers. Furthermore, they feared who that army represented, the Grand Heaven Master. There were many stories about this army of corpse troopers. In one version, they had been assembled by the third-generation Arch-Emperor, a sort of Black Ops force that the Arch-Emperors had controlled from generation to generation. Now, though, that army had fallen into the hands of the Grand Heaven Master. However, other people said that the so-called Corpse Trooper army had not existed before the rise of the Grand Heaven Master. Supposedly, he had created the army using the corpses of the nobles and aristocrats who had resisted him. Virtually every possible origin story for the army existed, but all of them were connected to the Grand Heaven Master. As news of the reappearance of the corpse troopers began to spread, many people were shaken, and began to pay close attention to what was unfolding. Everyone knew that something big was about to happen. Most importantly, everyone also knew that the person who now led the Grand Heaven Master's army was Bai Hao. He had offended countless chosen, and although he didn't have direct dealings with every almighty person among the nobility and aristocracy, he was connected to virtually all of them. The bloody event from just a few nights ago was still the subject of much discussion, and everyone knew that the vengeance Bai Hao would wreak would be a major event. Everyone's minds were racing as they pondered what would happen, and at the same time, everyone was completely on guard. Bai Xiaochun actually had no idea that his going out at the head of 1,000 black-armored soldiers was causing such a stir. He just felt wonderful to be the center of so much attention, and couldn't help but revel in his success. It's been a long time, too long, in fact, since I've basked in such glory. Back in Giant Ghost City, I was the major domo, and yet, had no true military power. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun truly felt as if he had the right to look down on all creation. Sticking his chin up, he slowed down a bit as he flew through the air. His destination was Arch-Emperor City's Grand Asylum, which was not located in the Central District. Rather, it was in Burrow 49. As Bai Xiaochun flew along with his 1,000 black-armored soldiers, the city guards just looked at him from a distance, not daring to get close. As such, Bai Xiaochun was able to go directly to the Grand Asylum. The Grand Asylum was constructed to look like an enormous, coiled python. The entrance was the python's mouth, and as soon as Bai Xiaochun appeared there, the warden and other important prison officers flew out to meet him. The sight of Bai Xiaochun and his 1,000 black-armored soldiers caused all of them to shiver in fright. Obviously, they had heard that this Bai Hao had been appointed by the Grand Heaven Master to serve as the inspections commissioner. Trembling, they clasped hands, bowed, and said, "Greetings, inspections commissioner. You recognize me?" Bai Xiaochun said coolly, keeping his hands clasped behind his back and his chin stuck up. The warden of the Grand Asylum was a middle-aged man who was so fat he was almost a ball. Smiling nervously, he said, "Inspections Commissioner Bai, you have unbounded integrity, and are spectacularly famous. Nobodies like us can only gaze upward at your splendor. Only a few months ago, your humble servant gazed at you from afar, sir, and was impressed to no end by your imposing bearing. For whatever reason you've come, O exalted one, your humble servant will do everything in his power to help you." The warden was feeling very nervous. The fact that this was the first location Bai Xiaochun had chosen to visit after taking command of the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion left him feeling very unsettled. Bai Xiaochun wasn't very pleased with the overt flattery, and didn't get any sense at all that the warden was being sincere. However, considering his current status, it would be a big loss of face to cause problems for lowly figures such as the warden. Snorting coldly, he said, "Enough jibber-jabber. Just follow me and do what I say." Hands clasped behind his back, he swaggered into the Grand Asylum. The warden and the other officers were stunned by Bai Xiaochun's response, and immediately began to shiver even more than before. Hearts racing, and sweat pouring down their backs, they hurried after him. Although this was Bai Xiaochun's first time in the Grand Asylum, considering the time he had spent as a guard in Devil Penitentiary, much of it as the #1 Dark Inquisitor, he immediately identified with the musty odor of a prison that entered his nose. It was all very familiar. Eventually, they were in the warden's grand hall, where Bai Xiaochun sat down and said, "Bring out all of the records regarding the current prisoners." The nervously sweating warden immediately voiced his assent, and then arranged for all of the prisoner records to be brought over. Those records soon arrived in the form of a jade slip, which the warden personally handed to Bai Xiaochun. Looking very stern, Bai Xiaochun took the jade slip and then said, "Arrange a private chamber for me." With that, he began to study the jade slip. The warden immediately arranged for the nicest chamber in the entire Grand Asylum to be cleared out for Bai Xiaochun's use. He just hoped that he could get Bai Xiaochun out of the prison as quickly as possible. To have the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion present had him feeling extremely nervous. Considering the experience he had gained in Devil Penitentiary, Bai Xiaochun was quickly able to search for and identify the prisoners who were connected in some way to the aristocracy and nobility in Archemperor City. This prisoner. And this one. Him too. Bring them all to me one at a time. Because of their connections, such prisoners couldn't gain their freedom, but had relatively good lives inside of the prison, and roughly the same access to cultivation resources as they had on the outside. Many of them lorded it over their fellow prisoners, and some were even treated with great respect by the guards. Therefore, when Bai Xiaochun issued his order, the warden hesitated. Irritated, Bai Xiaochun glared at the warden and said, "Warden, could it be that you want the inspections commissioner to personally go get the prisoners?" At the same time, the black-armored corpse troopers at his side began to radiate murderous auras that made the area instantly seem like a hell filled with malevolent Asura spirits. Trembling in terror, the warden unhesitatingly issued the proper orders. Almost immediately, the prison was thrown into complete chaos as the guards found the prisoners Bai Xiaochun had named and grabbed them with maniacal fury. "What are you people doing? I work for Heavenly Marquis Zhou. What gall you have? Stay your hand." In response, the guards simply surrounded them, vicious expressions on their faces as they sealed their cultivation bases and dragged them over to the private chamber that had been set aside for Bai Xiaochun. Soon, dozens of prisoners were lined up outside, trembling in fear and unsure of what was happening. When the prisoners began to talk amongst themselves to try to figure out what was going on, the guards immediately silenced them. The area grew very quiet, and the guards all bowed deeply in a certain direction down the corridor. The prisoners looked over nervously and saw the warden, a fawning expression on his face as he walked down the hall alongside a young man. The young man was handsome, with his chin stuck up and his hands clasped behind his back. Of course, he was Bai Xiaochun, and he was followed by a contingent of black-armored soldiers who struck fear into the souls of anyone who saw them. "As the inspections commissioner, I've come here to personally interrogate these prisoners. Bring them in as I call for them. Furthermore, no one is allowed to disturb me as I carry out the interrogations." After coming to a stop at the door, Bai Xiaochun looked around with a stern expression. The warden immediately voiced his assent. Moments later, Bai Xiaochun was in the private chamber with the first prisoner. Outside, the black-armored soldiers stood guard, preventing anyone from getting close. The warden stood there, terrified and anxious, still unsure of why Bai Xiaochun had picked this place as his first location to visit. What is the purpose of him coming here? The warden thought, confused. That was when the first blood-curdling screams erupted from the secret chamber. The faces of everyone present fell, and all eyes went wide, especially those of the guards who ranked as inquisitors. That screaming! What methods could provoke such a reaction? The guards were alarmed, and the prisoners even more so. Many of them gasped in fear. As for the warden, his heart filled with emotions of both shock and reverence. The screaming lasted for the time it takes half an incense stick to burn. After that, the door of the private chamber opened, and a trembling figure was thrown out, who was of course the prisoner who had gone into the room with Bai Xiaochun. His eyes were glazed over, and he seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Next. Then, Bai Xiaochun's voice broke the silence as he spoke from the private chamber. Bai Xiaochun had long since made his decision. He wanted revenge, but he needed to have evidence to justify his actions. Even if that evidence wasn't completely conclusive, he would at least need to provide some sort of explanation to the Grand Heaven Master. As far as he was concerned, this was the only way to get that evidence. Furthermore, there was no way that other people would have been able to guess that he would come to the Grand Asylum to perform interrogations. Few people in the world had ever served as prison guards, and fewer as inquisitors. Therefore, almost no one would ever realize that the Grand Asylum was a place where countless shocking secrets were held. To Bai Xiaochun, the Grand Asylum was the greatest weakness in his enemy's armor. After all, back in Giant Ghost City, it had been in Devil Penitentiary that he had learned about the rebellion being planned by the three great clans. One unique aspect to Wildlander soul cultivators was that it was difficult to perform soul searches on them as they got more powerful. However, that wasn't a problem for Bai Xiaochun. The prisoners he had selected for interrogation were perfect sources of the evidence he needed. All of them had committed heinous crimes, and all of them were deeply connected to the nobility and aristocracy. Due to various random reasons, though, none of them had been sentenced to death. As time passed, more and more prisoners went into the private chamber, and endless screaming filled the halls of the prison. Everyone present was shaken, especially the inquisitors, whose eyes began to shine with bright light. The exalted inspections commissioner is also a dark inquisitor. You're right, you know what, I remember now. I heard that Bai Hao was vicious and merciless, and that he actually became the #1 Dark Inquisitor back in Giant Ghost City. Soon, the warden heard what the inquisitors were saying, and he began to tremble inwardly, filled with fear at the techniques Bai Xiaochun was using. Although the warden didn't even qualify to be the type of person who was directly connected to the Arch-Emperor, he had heard the stories of what had happened many years ago, when the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion instigated a 7-month reign of terror. Back then, not everyone who had been dragged into the calamity had actually been guilty. That mere thought caused the warden to shiver. Looking at the black-armored corpse troopers standing guard over the private chamber, the warden decided that he would fulfill Bai Xiaochun's every request, no matter what it was. After a full day of dozens of interrogations, Bai Xiaochun got plenty of clues. At that point, he walked out of the private chamber, an unsightly expression on his face as he held out another jade slip. This one was filled with the names of over 100 new prisoners. Bring them to me. The warden didn't hesitate for even a second. Loudly voicing his affirmation, he immediately arranged for the second group of prisoners to be brought to Bai Xiaochun for interrogation. Eventually, a third group was called for, then a fourth and a fifth. As Bai Xiaochun was focusing on performing interrogations to get the evidence he needed for his revenge, the outside world was being shaken by the events playing out. With clouds in place, it is impossible to see the sun or moon. But if a pair of hands spread the cloud cover, then everyone could see. As soon as word started to spread about Bai Hao's background, many people began to speculate as to what exactly he was doing. What? He went to the Grand Asylum? What did Bai Hao go there for? This isn't good. He was a Dark Inquisitor back in Giant Ghost City. Don't tell me he's going to go rifling for secrets among the prisoners in the Grand Asylum. However, what was particularly marvelous about Bai Xiaochun's plan was that, even if a given prisoner had access to important information, people on the outside of the prison who also had access to the same information would often not believe that said prisoner truly knew what they knew. After all, if the people on the outside were aware that any given prisoner had access to that sensitive information, the prisoner would have long since been silenced in death. It was in the fourth group of prisoners that Bai Xiaochun finally found the information he was looking for. One of the prisoners revealed that a certain heavenly marquis had been maintaining secret communications with the Grand Prince. Bai Xiaochun even remembered the name of that heavenly marquis. His son was particularly close to Zhou Hong. Pulling out his inspections commissioner command medallion, he did a bit of research, and confirmed that this very person had helped Zhou Hong spread rumors about Chen Manyao and Shushan. Bai Xiaochun chuckled darkly, and then continued with more interrogations. All in all, he was in the Grand Asylum for half a month. During that time, he interrogated all suspicious individuals, and yet, was not satisfied. Therefore, he went on to interrogate some of the other random prisoners who had committed heinous crimes. Some of them were prisoners who had been so shaken by the previous string of interrogations that they told what they knew without having to use any special methods, which was a good thing, considering that his supply of aphrodisiac pills was limited. Most shocking of all was that it was during the last interrogation of a prisoner who didn't seem important at all, that he got the most shocking bit of evidence. Li Tiansheng's father. He's the heavenly marquis in the Li clan, right? Bai Xiaochun knew that he had hooked a big fish, and was delighted. Ending the interrogations, he walked out of the private room, waving his black-armored corpse troopers to his side as he flew out of the Grand Asylum. Respectful expressions could be seen on the faces of the guards as he left, and many of them even looked at him with reverence. The efficiency with which he performed interrogations was shocking, and because of it, many of the guards wouldn't hesitate to leap to do Bai Xiaochun's bidding. As for the warden, he breathed a sigh of relief. He had felt a lot of pressure over the last half a month, and had been worried that the slightest slip-up on his part would get him dragged into a huge mess. After reverently escorting Bai Xiaochun out of the prison, he hurried back inside and went into secluded meditation, well aware that another bloodbath was coming to Arch-Emperor City. Bai Xiaochun was delighted, but didn't immediately go to cause a scene with Li Tiansheng's father, the Heavenly Marquis. Instead, he went to the Imperial Palace to pay a formal visit to the Grand Heaven Master. How dare they provoke me? HMPH, I'm going to make sure they realize that Bai Xiaochun is not so easy to deal with. As he headed toward the palace, he pondered the situation and realized that he still didn't have enough manpower. Therefore, he contacted Zhou Yixing again, and told him to return to Arch-Emperor City with his men. Around then, he arrived at Heaven Master Hall, where he clasped hands and bowed. Your humble servant Bai Hao offers greetings, Grand Heaven Master. I have a matter to discuss. As soon as his voice echoed out, the dragon stuck its head down from the clouds and looked curiously at Bai Xiaochun. However, before it could do anything else, the door of the hall opened, revealing the Grand Heaven Master sitting there looking at Bai Xiaochun. Settling his aura, Bai Xiaochun hurried inside. Grand Heaven Master, your humble servant accomplished his mission smoothly. I've already dug up evidence of 2 heavenly marquises who disturbed the cultivation of the Arch-Emperor. With that, he produced a jade slip that he offered to the Grand Heaven Master. The Grand Heaven Master took the jade slip and looked at it with a smile. Then he rubbed his thumb over its surface and muttered to himself for a moment. Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times, wondering if the Grand Heaven Master would have him take care of the 2 heavenly marquises. After all, the evidence wasn't completely conclusive, and even extensive analysis could only produce middling speculation about the results. However, after all of the interrogations in the Grand Asylum, Bai Xiaochun was fairly certain he understood those 2 heavenly marquises. Neither of them were good people. For example, the entire Li clan all practiced poison cultivation. The main technique they used was called Heart of a Woman, which involved collecting the hearts of women to use as part of the technique. It was an evil technique to begin with, and the more powerful the cultivator got, the more women's hearts were needed. The Li clan had essentially been built on a foundation of bloodshed. And then there was the Chen clan, which was even worse in some ways. They funded their clan by selling life force. That life force was harvested from cultivator slaves that the clan kept in pens like animals. Furthermore, all of those slaves were cultivators captured from the Great Wall. The Chen clan was one reason why all of the noble and aristocratic chosen had recovered so quickly after having been captured and drained of life force by Bai Xiaochun. As he thought about these 2 evil clans, Bai Xiaochun looked furtively at the Grand Heaven Master. The Grand Heaven Master's face was expressionless, and he wasn't saying even a single word, which caused Bai Xiaochun's nervousness to mount. It was really impossible to tell what the Grand Heaven Master was thinking. Enough time had passed for an incense stick to burn, whereupon his thumb flexed, and the jade slip transformed into ash. Go find Heavenly Marquis Li and Heavenly Marquis Chen, and arrest them. In response to the Grand Heaven Master's words, the air next to Bai Xiaochun rippled, and that familiar black-robed man stepped out. After voicing his assent, he bowed and vanished. Bai Xiaochun was startled, but at the same time, felt a bit excited. I heard that you're good at shakedowns, the Grand Heaven Master said. You have 4 hours to go handle the Li and Chen clans. With that, he closed his eyes. Bai Xiaochun's heart immediately began to race, and he felt all the blood in his body rushing to his head. Although he was excited that he would be able to profit from performing some more shakedowns, what was more important was that he could have his revenge. Furthermore, he could use his public office to do so, which was an amazing thing. As it turned out, this Grand Heaven Master was turning out to be a great guy. He immediately voiced his assent, then turned and flew out of Heaven Master Hall. Obviously, the Grand Heaven Master wanted him to do as the old saying said. Kill the chickens to scare the monkeys. Punish some people to serve as a warning to others. He didn't even need to have any hard evidence, just some clues. Even speculation was enough for the Grand Heaven Master to give him the go-ahead to take lives. With someone like him to rely on, nobody would ever dare to provoke me. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he proudly waved his sleeve to summon his 1,000 corpse troopers. Then, he headed toward the Li clan. Get ready, Li Tiansheng. Lord Bai is coming. It was an exhilarating feeling to be leading the 1,000-strong corpse trooper blood battalion out from the Imperial Palace. All of the Imperial guards trembled in fear at the sight, to the point where they didn't dare to even breathe, much less get in the way. By now, everyone in the city knew about Bai Xiaochun's appointment to the position of Inspections Commissioner. The additional fact that the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion had been awakened led to widespread fear. In fact, word had even spread out into the wildlands and beyond. Not even Bai Xiaochun knew how famous he was at this point. Even the 4 great river source sects in the Heavenspan River region, the sects who controlled the Great Wall, had heard of the name of Archemperor City's Inspections Commissioner, Bai Hao. In Archemperor dynasty, Bai Xiaochun was the newest dragon to walk the face of the earth, a razor-sharp knife in the hand of the Grand Heaven Master. Before long, people were gossiping about Bai Hao's past in Giant Ghost City. People talked about how he was vicious and merciless, how he had killed members of his own clan, and his daredevil act of kidnapping a demigod expert. Then there were his shakedowns, the fact that he was a wife stealer, and countless other details. In the end, everyone was left gasping in disbelief at all the stories. Most people believed him to be a lunatic. His battle prowess was astonishing, to the point where he had both attacked and captured more than 100 chosen. Later, he even fought back against a group of hundreds of chosen at the same time. A person like that could already be considered stunning without even mentioning that he had the backing of both the Giant Ghost King and the Grand Heaven Master. In fact, he was also the son-in-law of the Giant Ghost King. Because of all of these various aspects, Bai Xiaochun was now a very, very important person in the wildlands. He was far more famous than Zhou Hong, Gong Sunyi and the other chosen like them. And now, emboldened by the Grand Heaven Master, it was with a completely haughty air that he set out with his corpse troopers and their intense murderous aura. 1,000 beams of light merged together, causing rumbling sounds to echo out as they shot toward the Li clan, right in the middle of Archemperor City. Li Tiansheng, you and Zhou Hong worked together with all those other chosen to cause me endless trouble. You tried your best to see me dead, and I let you off the hook over and over again. But now you've gone and really pissed me off. Well, let me tell you, when I get pissed off, I frighten even myself. Bai Xiaochun didn't have a care in the world, and his eyes shone with keen anticipation as he imagined the reactions of all of the people who had tried to kill him in the past. And you're first on the list, Li Tiansheng. With that, he accelerated, causing the rumbling sounds to intensify as his 1,000 corpse troopers got closer and closer to the Li clan. The sight of Bai Xiaochun brazenly speeding through the air attracted a lot of attention, and many gasps. Furthermore, when people realized what direction he was heading in, coldness gripped their hearts, and speculations began to run wild. He's not doing anything to suppress that murderous aura. What is Bai Hao going to do? Look at the direction he's heading in. It seems like Burrow 9? Burrow 9? That's where the Li clan is. The Li clan occupied roughly 20% of Burrow 9. They had risen to power because of the Heavenly Marquis in their clan. Not only was their clan populous, they had many outside soul cultivators who were willing to work for them because of how powerful they were. It was a snowball effect that had quickly turned them into a mighty group that few people would ever dare to trifle with. Even as everyone looked on in shock, Bai Xiaochun led his 1,000 corpse troopers into Burrow 9, toward a sprawling courtyard complex, from within the middle of which rose a 300-meter-tall tower. That tower was a Heavenly Marquis pagoda. Within Archemperor City, only Heavenly Marquis clans had structures 300 meters tall. As for the Heavenly Dukes, they had pagodas 3,000 meters tall. Almost as soon as Bai Xiaochun caught sight of the Li clan's pagoda, the people in the Li clan realized that he was heading in their direction. It led to a small-scale commotion, with countless cultivators flying out of the clan to observe his approach. Li Tiansheng was in the crowd. He was the heir apparent of the clan, and also a chosen, with a very high position. Unless his father was present, he was essentially the clan chief. Bai Hao. At first Li Tiansheng was startled, but his expression soon twisted into a vicious snarl. The venomous look in his eyes was clear. He had paid a steep price to the Chen clan to restore his life force after the most recent incident, and the person responsible for that was none other than Bai Xiaochun. His hatred for Bai Hao was part of his heart, but he was also aware that he was in a very different position now. He was the inspections commissioner, backed by the Grand Heaven Master, and the fact that he had come surrounded by a murderous aura caused Li Tiansheng's heart to begin to pound in his chest. Without any hesitation, he issued orders to activate the clan's defensive spell formation. Even as he issued the orders, a piercing whistling sound filled the air as Bai Xiaochun arrived with his 1,000 corpse troopers. The murderous aura seething off of the corpse troopers formed something like a black cloud that hovered above the Li clan. There were already other soul cultivators showing up in the area to see what was going to happen. All of them were filled with shock, and were starting to come to their own conclusions about how events would play out. Could it be that the Grand Heaven Master is actually going to make a move? And the Li clan is first on the list? No way. It's probably just Bai Hao using his status to exact revenge. As numerous individuals looked on in astonishment, Bai Xiaochun hovered there grandly, flanked by his 1,000 corpse troopers, looking over the Li clan cultivators, who were clearly ready for a fight. Then his gaze came to rest on Li Tiansheng, around whom were clustered an unusually large number of clan cultivators. Glaring, Bai Xiaochun said, "Li Tiansheng, why haven't you come out to pay respects to the inspections commissioner?" As his voice echoed out like thunder, the corpse troopers' murderous auras grew even more intense. The Li clan cultivators' expressions flickered, many of them growing fiercer. By this point, Li Tiansheng was panting a bit, and his mind was spinning. However, he didn't let that show on his face. Instead, he scowled and yelled, "You've got a lot of guts coming here and offending your superiors, Bai Hao. This is the manner of a heavenly marquis, not just some random place where you can go make a scene. Back down immediately." Sticking his chin up, Bai Xiaochun clasped his hands behind his back and brazenly said, "The manner of a heavenly marquis? Heh. The main reason Lord Bai came here today is because the Li clan is the manner of a heavenly marquis. I heard you have a lot of wealth in this clan of yours. I'm just worried that some of your treasures are forgeries and would like to help you inspect them." Inside, he was bursting with happiness and was very pleased with how amazing his little speech had just been. It was the type of feeling that came with occupying the position of superiority and justice. Cultivators of the Li clan were accustomed to being arrogant people and immediately responded with boisterous, impolite words. "What gall, do you have a death wish or something, Bai Hao? What makes you think you have the right to come cause trouble for our Li clan? What a joke. I guess Bai Hao is just a complete moron." As for Li Tiansheng, his expression was unsightlier than ever, and he was getting more anxious by the moment. He could tell that something was off about the situation, but was convinced that there was little likelihood the Grand Heaven Master was interested in making a move against the Li clan. The most likely possibility was that Bai Hao had come here to enact personal vengeance. As such, Li Tiansheng's eyes flickered with cold light. That means this is a chance to exterminate this guy once and for all. Although he was afraid of the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion, the reserve powers of the Li clan, along with the fact that his father was Heavenly Marquis Li, gave him plenty of confidence. "Li clan cultivators, hear my orders. Anyone who enters Li clan territory shall be executed immediately." The Li clan cultivators snarled viciously, and their killing intent soared. More people were flying up into the air from inside the clan, many of them clan members, but others being hired soul cultivators. Before long, there were more than 10,000 people visible, all of them surging with the desire to kill. Overall, they actually seemed a bit more impressive than the Corpse Trooper Blood Battalion. The surrounding onlookers gasped in shock, and even Bai Xiaochun was a bit startled. However, he knew his status, and had his orders from the Grand Heaven Master. Obviously, the fact that the Grand Heaven Master had sent him here meant that he didn't intend for the Li clan to kill him. Feeling a bit more confident with that thought, he glared at Li Tiansheng, convinced that he had been acting a bit too softly before. Looking away from Li Tiansheng and the cultivators around him, he turned his gaze to the pagoda. "Heavenly Marquis Li, I've come here today with orders from the Grand Heaven Master. I'd like to ask you a question. Do you admit to your crimes?" The entire atmosphere in the area changed, and countless gasps could be heard among the onlookers. The Li clan cultivators were all visibly shocked, and Li Tiansheng's heart was beginning to pound. As the words left Bai Xiaochun's mouth, Li Tiansheng's father sat in a private chamber in the highest level of the enormous pagoda. He was a majestic heavenly marquis, and yet, his expression was profoundly grim. Despite being a half-diva, his mood was so foul that it had destabilized his cultivation base to a certain degree. There could be no misunderstanding Bai Xiaochun's words. Furthermore, Li Tiansheng's father had been paying close attention to Bai Xiaochun's arrival, and during the entire time, his expression had been slowly transforming, until it was now profoundly grim. Even his breathing was in chaos. He was a heavenly marquis, and was therefore even more profoundly insightful than Li Tiansheng and the other cultivators in the clan. He could tell that this Bai Hao would not have brought his troops here without the express permission of the Grand Heaven Master. It wasn't a matter of strength in arms, but of position and standing. There were 108 heavenly marquises in the Arch-Emperor dynasty, and for the inspections commissioner to visit one with such brazen audacity spoke volumes about the Grand Heaven Master's stance. Is it a threat? Heavenly Marquis Li thought. At the moment, he was feeling profoundly uneasy, which in turn had him more vigilant than ever. As he thought about everything he knew about the Grand Heaven Master, beads of sweat began to pop out on his forehead, and terror rose up in his heart. The Grand Heaven Master wants to kill me. As soon as Heavenly Marquis Li came to this conclusion, a vicious snarl appeared on his face, and he began to pant. He knew that if the Grand Heaven Master really did want him dead, then he had no other choice than to try to escape before the calamity fell. And yet, he couldn't quite reconcile himself to doing that. He had practiced cultivation for many, many years to reach the position of Heavenly Marquis, and led one of the most powerful clans in the Wildlands. He refused to just sit around passively waiting to be killed. He had to fight. He had to figure out a way to resolve this deadly situation. I need to buy time. That was his decision. His only chance at resolving the issue was to buy time. If he could make a big enough scene in the meantime, then the other Heavenly Marquises and the Heavenly Dukes would have a chance to react. Maybe even the 4 Heavenly Kings. After all, he was a Heavenly Marquis, and the other Heavenly Marquises would not be happy about one of their kind being casually disposed of. In fact, they would likely come to his aid. In some senses, they would actually be saving themselves. If he could get all of the important people in the Imperial Court to rise to action, then even the Grand Heaven Master would have to take the matter seriously. And what about the Arch-Emperor? No, I can't go to the Arch-Emperor. All of a sudden, a tremor ran through Heavenly Marquis Li, and he suddenly had an inkling of where the true issue lay. If the Grand Heaven Master wanted to kill me, he could just issue a decree ordering my execution. Why would he send Bai Hao to do the deed? He's using the pretext of killing me to see who else in the court would speak up for me. He's trying to lure the snakes out of their holes. Such thoughts filled Heavenly Marquis Li's mind, along with a bitter coldness. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed that this was the case, so he quickly decided that he had to do 2 things. First, buy time so that people would come to his aid. Second, figure out a way to escape. Buy time. 'Cause a big scene. Eyes glittering, he sent a message to Li Tiansheng. Kill the corpse troopers, and do anything necessary to cut down this Bai Hao. Even as everyone in the Li clan was trembling, Li Tiansheng got the orders from his father. His immediate reaction was that things didn't seem to have escalated to that level, and yet, now was not the time to ponder the situation. Glaring at Bai Xiaochun, he yelled, "Bai Hao's orders are forged. This is a conspiracy. Cultivators of the Li clan, kill him immediately." The other cultivators under his command hesitated for a moment, but knew that if the Li clan fell, they would likely be killed along with it. Snarling, they shouted and charged into battle. Within the briefest of moments, over 10,000 cultivators were howling and flying toward Bai Xiaochun. In response, Bai Xiaochun glared and waved his hand, sending his 1,000 black-armored corpse troopers flying to meet the charge. Booms immediately rang out in all directions. As for Bai Xiaochun, he didn't actually join the fighting, but remained further back, guarded by a contingent of corpse troopers. His poor little life was the most important thing to consider, and he wouldn't casually put it in harm's way. This was his first time seeing the corpse troopers in action, and it was a shocking sight. They didn't seem to feel pain at all, and clearly relied on body refinement techniques. They fought fiercely wherever they went, slaughtering foes left and right. Neither magical techniques nor the effects of magical items seemed to have any effect on them. They charged into the fighting without any hesitation. Within the space of a few breaths of time, agonized shrieks began to rise into the air. Clearly, the cultivators of the Li clan were no match for the corpse troopers. In fact, many of them were literally ripped to pieces in the blink of an eye. The reek of blood filled the air, and before long, the clan's spell formation rumbled to life, sending a blood-colored screen of light shining up, accompanied by what sounded like the beating of a heart. As the heartbeat echoed out, black, toxic gas began to erupt from the Li clan cultivators. Furthermore, many of them pulled out actual human hearts, which they then crushed while simultaneously shouting out bizarre words. As the hearts were crushed, the shadowy images of women appeared, mournful and venomous as they floated forward to fight the corpse troopers. Those shadowy women were highly toxic. As for the hearts which had just been crushed, they were none other than the manifestation of heart of a woman. This was the poison technique cultivated by the Li clan, which had been derived from the ancient saying, "The most vile poison cannot compare to the heart of a woman." However, based on what Bai Xiaochun could tell, what was vile here was not the hearts of the women. It was the poison technique the vicious Li clan cultivated after extracting the hearts and using them for cultivation purposes. The poisonous effect was shocking, and was the first thing that caused any problems for the corpse troopers. Their bodies even began to show signs of decay, and they were forced to slow down. Even their black suits of armor were affected. Bai Xiaochun immediately pulled them away from the fighting, and yet, that also exposed him. Killing intent seethed in Li Tiansheng's eyes as he shouted, "Kill Bai Hao." Even as his words echoed in the air, he shot at top speed toward Bai Xiaochun, flanked by 10 Li clan elders, all of whom had nascent soul cultivation bases. Toxic gas swirled around all of them, which took the form of shadowy women, all of whom had holes in their chests where their hearts should have been. Almost as soon as they appeared, a sensation of imminent crisis filled Bai Xiaochun's heart, and his face fell. Just when he was about to back up, a mysterious light shone in the eyes of the nearby corpse troopers who had been affected by the toxic gas. Simultaneously, they all opened their mouths and breathed in deeply. That caused a dramatic wind to spring up, which immediately sucked the toxic gas in the area into their bodies. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal, but the shocking thing was that after inhaling the toxic gas, their cultivation bases skyrocketed. Clearly, that toxic gas was actually beneficial to them, and could temporarily increase their cultivation. The rise in cultivation base power immediately negated their previous injuries, leaving them completely whole. Bai Xiaochun was quite pleased by this, and could see how incredible this army of corpse troopers was. Clearly, there were still more secrets about them that he had yet to discover. And that was most definitely the truth. The black-armored corpse troopers could absorb harmful magical techniques, and use them to catalyze their own cultivation bases. Essentially, it turned them into an army that could get stronger the longer they fought. Bursting with excitement, Bai Xiaochun pointed at Li Tiansheng and the people next to him. Kill them all. Bursting with murderous auras, the corpse troopers immediately charged in Li Tiansheng's direction. Not good, Li Tiansheng thought, his face falling as he prepared to fall back. However, he wasn't fast enough, and before he could even move, both he and the 10 clan elders were set upon by the corpse troopers. Blood immediately began to spray out of their mouths, and they were quickly left with severe injuries. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was laughing heartily. This is what happens when me and you fight, Li Tiansheng. When I make a move, even God in the heavens hides his face. Bai Xiaochun immediately marveled at how good he was with words. However, in the same moment he finished speaking, the bloodied and injured Li Tiansheng looked back at him and viciously shouted, "Organ sacrifice." As soon as the words left his mouth, the shield of light distorted as an enormous blood-colored heart appeared. At first glance, it didn't appear to be illusory at all. Furthermore, it was actually made of 1 million actual human hearts. Those hearts represented 1 million women who had died. This was the most powerful function of the Li clan's spell formation. The instant the gigantic heart appeared, it collapsed, becoming an ink-like cloud of black smoke that spread out in all directions. It began to corrode everything it touched, even some of the hired soul cultivators. Those who were too slow screamed and were transformed into globs of blood that spattered down on the ground. Only the members of the Li clan who cultivated the heart of a woman were unaffected. In fact, expressions of madness could be seen on their faces as they opened their mouths and breathed in the gas, which instantly healed them. Then, they went back to fighting the corpse trooper blood battalion. The sight of what was happening with the poison gas caused Bai Xiaochun's scalp to tingle, and he started to back up. However, that was when Li Tiansheng's father took advantage of the chaos to take a step forward, becoming something like a bolt of lightning that shot toward Bai Xiaochun. Your life is over, Bai Hao. Bai Xiaochun's pupils constricted as he looked at the incoming heavenly Marquis Li. Up to this point, he hadn't participated in any of the fighting, mostly because he wanted to be on guard for something just like this. Therefore, as soon as the heavenly Marquis appeared, his cultivation base surged with power. However, before he could make a move, a sinister voice suddenly rang out into the area. So, you've finally emerged from your heavenly Marquis pagoda. I guess it was worth it for me to hold back until this moment. Hey Ming, heavenly Marquis Li snarled and tried to back up. However, he was too late. The instant he tried to reverse momentum, a huge hand descended from above with incredible speed, crushing through the Li clan's defensive spell formation and grabbing heavenly Marquis Li. Heavenly Marquis, father! Everyone in the Li clan began to cry out in alarm, especially Li Tiansheng, who seemed so terrified that he lost all of his will to even move. At the same time, eyes went wide among the crowd of onlookers and many of them gasped. As for Bai Xiaochun, he looked up to see that familiar, black-robed figure up above in the air. Bai Xiaochun was not very happy about this development, especially considering that he was the inspections commissioner. Hey, you black-robed freak, he shouted, we're on the same team here, aren't we? It's not very nice to stick around hiding and then jump into things at the last minute. I worked hard to reel in this big fish, and now you're trying to hook him yourself? You're trying to steal my thunder. The black-robed man looked down at Bai Xiaochun for a moment before coolly responding, he can easily self-detonate when inside the heavenly Marquis pagoda. Besides, the Grand Heaven Master told me to arrest him, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. As far as stealing your thunder, well, allow me to bestow you with some good fortune. With that, he pointed his finger downward, causing a gale-force wind to sweep through the Li clan. Instantly, the previously damaged spell formation completely and utterly shattered. Popping sounds rang out as numerous cultivators within the clan who had been powering it experienced a backlash, causing blood to spray out of their mouths. At the same time, the toxic gas in the area swirled together into 1,000 separate strands that shot toward one particular corpse trooper who was at the half-diva level. Upon reaching him, the strands of smoke poured into him, a baptism of sorts. The corpse trooper immediately began to tremble as he absorbed the smoke, and although he appeared to be corroding, that only caused him to absorb the smoke more quickly, until it was rushing into him through his pores. Then he threw his head back and howled as his cultivation base power skyrocketed. Shockingly, he was now no longer at the half-diva level. He had broken through. His power grew and grew until he was only a hair away from the diva realm. The toxic gas provided by the hearts of 1 million women only provided a temporary boost, and didn't make him a complete diva. But he could still crush any other half-diva. Bai Xiaochun was stunned by what he was seeing. Although the upgrade to the corpse trooper was not permanent, only temporary, it was still a shocking thing. What kinds of monsters are these things, he thought. What was happening surpassed even what he could imagine, and in truth, the word, monster, really wasn't sufficient to describe the black-armored corpse troopers. There are a total of 100,000 corpse troopers. In that case, does it really mean that they could turn into 100,000 devas? Or even 100,000 demigods? How is that even possible? It almost seemed like it was some big joke. The power on display that the Wildlands was capable of completely exceeded all imagination. However, by this point, he also realized that these black-armored corpse troopers must have some sort of big weakness. For example, a lack of resources to power them. This is the true reserve power of the Imperial Court, He Ming said, sounding a bit regretful. Unfortunately, they have some fatal flaws. With that, he shook his head and vanished, taking Heavenly Marquis Li with him. Heart-pounding, Bai Xiaochun looked at his two corpse troopers who were now almost on the same level as devas. It didn't take long before his eyes were shining with delight. Who would have ever thought I would end up controlling an army this powerful? Excited, he threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Then, he sent out a thought that recalled the newly upgraded Diva Corpse Trooper, who stood at his side like a Tao protector. Feeling very pleased, and very proud of himself, he looked over at the Li clan forces and waved his hand, sending his corpse troopers over to crush them. Meanwhile, Li Tiansheng was trembling as he realized what Bai Xiaochun was thinking. We're willing to heed the imperial decree from the inspections commissioner, he shouted urgently, clasping hands and bowing deeply in fear of displeasing Bai Xiaochun. Please help us to inspect all of our treasures. The rest of the Li clan cultivators all looked as pale as death. Their spell formation had been broken, and their heavenly marquis arrested. None of them had any will left to fight. Therefore, it was after only a slight moment of hesitation that they bowed their heads in acknowledgement of Li Tiansheng's words, and then clasped hands in Bai Xiaochun's direction. Bai Xiaochun's jaw dropped at the sight of so many people all bowing to him. Then he looked over at Li Tiansheng, and was not very pleased. Li Tiansheng had reacted far too quickly to the sudden change. Furthermore, he even went as far as to copy Bai Xiaochun's earlier words from before the fighting started. The fact that there was an audience to all of this had Bai Xiaochun feeling even more irritated than before. Snorting, he ignored Li Tiansheng and the rest of the Li clan cultivators, and immediately set to work with his shakedown. The Li clan had a heavenly marquis, and profound reserve savings that obviously surpassed the resources of the three great clans from Giant Ghost City. After all, even though those three great clans had diva patriarchs, this was Arch-Emperor City, the seat of power in the Wildlands, and a place where the resources surpassed all other locations. There were soul-hoarding pagodas and countless portions of soul medicine, as well as magical items that formed the reserve power. The sight of it all was quite dazzling to Bai Xiaochun. There was a 9-meter-long spirit bone which emanated pulses of spiritual energy that closely resembled the spirit jade statue from back in Giant Ghost City. There were numerous magical items with 13 or 14-fold spirit enhancements. There was even a whole collection of heavenspan river water. And even spirit stones. It was a vast pile of treasure, almost a mountain. It was in the middle of the shakedown that Zhou Yixing finally arrived, and when he saw the growing pile of treasure, he was stunned. However, as soon as Bai Xiaochun gave the word, he quickly set to work organizing it and packing it away. The vast amount of wealth that was building up was shocking, but it was what Bai Xiaochun found in the rear courtyard, protected in a restricted area, that caused him to rub his eyes in disbelief. Am I seeing things? There, right in the middle of the restricted area, protected by multi-layered restrictive spells, was a flower with 7 leaves on it. Rainbow spirit thistle, he murmured, shaken. Rainbow spirit thistle was a type of medicinal ingredient he had read about back in the Starry Sky Tao Polarity sect. It was the primary ingredient in a type of spirit medicine that could be used to break through from the nascent soul stage into the diva realm. It could increase one's chances of success by 30%. Although it would only help when aiming for the weakest tier of devas, it would still be helpful. After all, the patriarchs of the spirit and bloodstream divisions back in the river-defying sect had gone into secluded meditation to make a breakthrough, but had not succeeded as far as Bai Xiaochun was ever aware. If either of them had possessed a rainbow spirit thistle, though, they would have had a much greater chance of succeeding. It was a spirit plant that was very rare in the Heavenspan River region, and would lead to bloody conflicts if it appeared. Countless people would fight madly over them, and yet, here was one right in front of Bai Xiaochun. The wildlands was not a suitable place to grow spirit plants, and therefore, it was a complete shock to see one here. Gasping, Bai Xiaochun looked around, and realized that there was something unusual about this rear courtyard. Clearing his throat, he tried to seem very calm as he said, "What a wonderful flower. Men, come dig it up for me. And do not under any circumstances deliver it to my mansion. I'm going to get very angry at anyone who does that." Even though I very much like to grow flowers, as the inspections commissioner, I definitely could not embezzle things in that way. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.